Riba, the Arabic word for increase, is the single most condemned financial act in Islam, and understanding it unlocks almost everything else about how Muslims are supposed to handle money. The Quran does not merely discourage it. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 275 through 279, God declares that those who deal in riba are at war with Him and His Messenger, a level of condemnation reserved for almost nothing else in the entire text. There are two types. Riba al-Nasiyah is the one most people recognize, charging more money back on a loan than the amount originally lent, purely because of time. Riba al-Fadl is subtler. It covers unequal exchanges of the same commodity, like trading 10 grams of gold for 12 grams of gold on the spot. Both are forbidden. According to a hadith recorded in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet cursed every single person involved in a riba transaction: the one who charges it, the one who pays it, the scribe who writes the contract, and the two witnesses who sign it. All four equally guilty. This is not a technicality or a cultural preference. It is the architectural foundation on which an entire parallel financial system has been built, from Islamic banks in London and Kuala Lumpur to home financing products designed specifically to avoid a single percentage point of interest. Zakat. Zakat is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, which already tells you it is not optional. It is not charity in the way most people use that word. Something generous you do when you feel like it. It is a legally defined right that the poor hold over the wealth of the rich. Calculated annually at a rate of 2.5% on any gold, silver, cash, or trade goods that have been sitting above a minimum threshold for a full lunar year. That threshold is called the nisab, and it is pegged to either 85 grams of gold or 595 grams of silver, whichever standard a scholar applies, and there is genuine disagreement between the two. The lunar year holding period is called the haul. The Quran specifies in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 60, exactly 8 categories of people who can receive zakat, including the poor, the indebted, travelers stranded without funds, and those working to collect and distribute zakat itself. Miss it, and the consequences according to hadith are severe. One describes the wealth of someone who refuses zakat being turned into a bald serpent that coils around their neck on the day of judgment and bites them. The point is structural redistribution, baked directly into the religion, running every single year. Gharar. If riba is the most famous prohibition in Islamic finance, Gharar is the most far-reaching in its practical consequences. The word means excessive uncertainty, and a hadith recorded in Sahih Muslim states plainly that the Prophet prohibited the sale of Gharar. The classic examples are selling fish still swimming in the sea, or fruit on a tree before it is clear whether it will actually ripen. Transactions where a fundamental element is unknown or unknowable at the time of the contract. For a contract to be valid under Islamic law, the price, the subject matter, the quantity, and the delivery terms all need to be clearly defined. Minor uncertainty is tolerated. Life has some ambiguity, and the law accounts for that. But major uncertainty that could foreseeably lead to dispute between the parties invalidates the deal entirely. The practical consequences of this rule today are enormous. Conventional insurance contracts, where you pay premiums for years and may receive nothing, or may receive a great deal, with the outcome determined by events neither party controls, are considered by most scholars to contain impermissible gharar. So do many derivatives, options contracts, and certain futures trades. This single hadith has generated an entire alternative industry. Maisir. Maisir is the Quranic term for gambling, and it appears condemned in the same verse as alcohol, Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 90, where both are called abominations from the work of Satan and commanded to be avoided. The pre-Islamic Arabs had a specific gambling game also called Al-Maisir, involving arrows and the division of a slaughtered camel, and the Quran named it directly. The prohibition extends to any transaction where one party's financial gain is purely another party's financial loss, determined entirely by chance, rather than productive effort or genuine risk sharing. Lotteries fall under this. Conventional casino gambling obviously does. The harm the Quran cites is social. Verse 91 explains it, breeds enmity and hatred between people, and distracts them from remembrance of God. Where things get contested today is in contemporary markets. Some scholars argue that highly speculative day trading and certain forms of cryptocurrency trading share the structural characteristics of Maisir. You are not investing in productive enterprise. You are betting on price movement. Others disagree. That debate is live and unresolved, so it should be understood as a scholarly conversation rather than settled law. Halal and haram industries. Islam does not just regulate how you handle money. It regulates where you earn it from. A Muslim is prohibited from investing in, owning, or financing any business whose primary activity is haram, meaning categorically forbidden. The list includes alcohol production and distribution, pork products, pornography, conventional weapons manufacturing for offensive warfare, gambling operations, and interest-based financial services. This is not a soft guideline. Earning income from these sources is considered sinful regardless of how the money is ultimately spent. The more nuanced question arises with mixed companies, a conglomerate that earns most of its revenue from permissible activities, but has a small haram subsidiary. Islamic finance screening bodies, including the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, known as AAOIFI, and the Dow Jones Islamic Market Index, apply revenue percentage filters to handle this, though the exact thresholds vary between standards and should be verified against the specific standard being applied. When a minority shareholding in a mixed company is deemed acceptable, scholars often prescribe a practice called purification, donating the proportional share of haram-derived income to charity. The principle underneath all of it is consistent. Your financial life should not prop up what your religion has declared destructive. Murabaha. Murabaha is the most widely used contract in Islamic banking globally, and it exists entirely because of the prohibition on riba. The mechanism is straightforward. Instead of a bank lending you money to buy a house or a car and charging you interest on the loan, the bank itself buys the asset and then sells it to you at a disclosed, agreed-upon markup with payment spread across installments. The profit the bank earns is fixed from the start. It cannot compound. It cannot increase if you take longer to pay, and it is declared openly before you sign anything. Ownership of the asset technically transfers twice, once from the seller to the bank, and once from the bank to you. The underlying logic is that the bank is earning a return on a genuine commercial transaction, buying and selling, rather than on the mere passage of time. Critics within Islamic scholarship, including some Deobandi scholars, argue that Murabaha is economically indistinguishable from an interest-bearing loan and amounts to a legal workaround. Proponents maintain that the legal structure is meaningfully different, and that AAOIFI standards, specifically Standard Number 2, govern how it must be executed to remain compliant. That tension is real and worth knowing about. Musharaka and Mudaraba. These two partnership structures are considered by many Islamic finance scholars to be the purest expression of what Islamic finance is actually supposed to look like, and both predate Islam itself, rooted in the trading practices of pre-Islamic Arabia. Musharaka is a joint venture where every partner contributes capital and shares in both profit and loss in proportion to their stake. Nobody gets a guaranteed return. If the business loses money, everyone loses money together. Mudaraba splits the roles differently. One party, called the Rab al-Mal, provides all the capital, while the other, called the Mudarib, provides labor and expertise. Profit is shared at whatever ratio the two parties freely negotiate upfront. But if the venture fails financially, only the capital provider absorbs the monetary loss. The working partner loses their time and effort. This structure is historically significant. According to widely cited accounts in Islamic biographical literature, the Prophet Muhammad himself worked as a mudarib, managing trade on behalf of Khadija, the wealthy merchant who would later become his wife, before their marriage. Both contracts eliminate the guaranteed, time-based return that defines riba and replace it with genuine shared economic risk. Ejara. Ejara means leasing, and it functions as Islam's answer to the conventional mortgage and hire purchase agreement. Under an Ejara arrangement, the financier, typically an Islamic bank, purchases the asset outright and then rents it to the customer for an agreed period at an agreed monthly payment. The customer uses the asset, pays rent, but does not own it yet. Ownership can transfer at the end of the lease through a separate contract, either a gift or a nominal sale, in an arrangement called Ejara wa Iktina, meaning lease ending in ownership. The critical legal distinction from a conventional mortgage lies in risk. During the lease period, the asset belongs to the bank, and if it is destroyed or rendered unusable through no fault of the customer, the financial loss falls on the owner, not the lessee. This genuine transfer of ownership risk is what separates Ejara from a loan dressed up in leasing language. In practice, Ejara is used extensively for aircraft financing, real estate, and equipment leasing across the Gulf Cooperation Council countries and in the United Kingdom, where institutions like Al Rayyan Bank have used it to offer Sharia-compliant home purchase plans to British Muslim customers. Sukuk. Sukuk are often described simply as Islamic bonds, but that description conceals a fundamental structural difference. A conventional bond is pure debt. You lend money, you receive interest, you get your principal back. A sukuk cannot work that way because debt-based returns constitute riba. Instead, sukuk holders own a proportional share in a tangible underlying asset, a toll road, a building, an aircraft fleet, and receive payments derived from the revenue that asset generates, such as rent or lease income. The asset must be real, must be halal, and must actually exist. The global sukuk market has grown into one of the most significant segments of international capital markets, with outstanding issuance figures running into the hundreds of billions of dollars. Malaysia consistently ranks as the world's largest sukuk market. The instrument is not without controversy. In 2008, Sheikh Mohammed Taqi Usmani, then chairman of the AAOIFI Sharia Board, made international headlines by stating that the vast majority of sukuk being issued at that time did not meet genuine Sharia-compliant standards, arguing that most were structured to guarantee capital repayment in ways that effectively replicated conventional bonds. The market responded with revised standards. The debate about what genuine asset-backed structure actually requires has not entirely gone away. Takaful. Conventional insurance is considered problematic under Islamic law on two simultaneous grounds. It contains Gharar because the outcome of the contract is fundamentally uncertain at signing, and it contains elements of Maisir because the insurer profits when the insured suffers no loss. Takaful is the cooperative alternative built to address both objections. Participants do not pay premiums to a company in exchange for coverage. Instead, they make contributions into a shared pool, framed legally as donations, with the mutual understanding that anyone in the group who suffers a loss will be compensated from that pool. The operator managing the fund earns either a flat fee under the Wakala model or a share of any investment profit the pool generates under the Murabaha model. Crucially, if the pool generates a surplus after claims are paid, that surplus can be returned to participants, something that never happens with a conventional insurer who keeps your premium regardless. The global Takaful industry has grown substantially, with the Gulf and Southeast Asia as its two largest markets. Life insurance remains the most contested area. Some scholars consider any life insurance haram in principle, while others accept Takaful life products as compliant. That disagreement is genuine and ongoing. Saddaka and Waqf. Beyond the mandatory 2.5% of Zakat, Islam has a second vast architecture of voluntary financial giving that historically reshaped entire cities. Saddaka is the broader term, any voluntary act of generosity, which according to Hadith can include money, food, a kind word, or even a smile. But the more structurally significant institution is the Waqf, a permanent charitable endowment in which an asset, land, a building, a sum of money, is donated in perpetuity for a designated purpose, with the principal legally frozen forever. It cannot be sold, inherited, gifted away, or repurposed without specific legal conditions being met. The revenues it generates flow into the charitable purpose indefinitely. At its peak, the Ottoman Waqf system funded hospitals, schools, water infrastructure, and soup kitchens across an empire. Historians cite figures suggesting Waqf covered a significant portion of public services in major Ottoman cities, though precise percentages vary between academic sources and should be treated with appropriate caution. Al-Azhar University in Cairo, founded in 970 CE and still operating today, was originally established and sustained through Waqf endowments. Contemporary Islamic finance has extended the concept into cash Waqf and corporate Waqf structures, attempting to revive an institution that colonial-era land reforms dismantled across much of the Muslim world. Khums, inheritance, and wealth distribution at death. Islam does not just regulate how wealth is earned and spent during a lifetime. It dictates, in mathematical detail, what happens to it afterward, and the rules are specifically designed to prevent generational concentration of wealth. The Quran devotes unusually specific verses, Surah An-Nisa, verses 11, 12, and 176, to spelling out fixed fractional inheritance shares for over a dozen categories of heirs, including spouses, children, parents, and siblings, each with a defined portion. A Muslim is permitted to freely will away no more than 1/3 of their total estate. The remaining 2/3 must follow the Quranic formula, regardless of personal preference. Khums, meaning literally 1/5, is a 20% levy mentioned in Surah Al-Anfal, verse 41, originally applied to war spoils. In Sunni jurisprudence, its application today is largely historical and confined to that narrow context. In Shia jurisprudence, Khums is actively applied to annual surplus income, wealth remaining after a year's household expenses, and represents an ongoing financial obligation paid to qualified religious authorities for distribution. The inheritance system as a whole functions, whether intentionally or as an observed consequence, as a built-in generational redistribution mechanism. Large estates are mathematically fragmented across many heirs with every passing generation, making it structurally difficult for wealth to remain concentrated in a single bloodline over centuries. Halal and haram. Everything you eat as a Muslim sits inside one of two categories, and the default setting for all food is actually permission, not restriction. Halal means lawful and permissible. Haram means forbidden. And according to Islamic legal tradition, anything that has not been explicitly prohibited is considered halal from the outset. The primary source for all food rules is the Quran, with the Hadith, the recorded sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, providing clarification and detail. Quran 2:168 instructs believers to eat what is halal and tayyib, a word that means not just lawful, but wholesome and pure. The four major schools of Islamic jurisprudence, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali, agree on the vast majority of food rulings, though they diverge meaningfully on edge cases. Intention also matters. A Muslim is expected to eat with awareness of whether what they're consuming is permitted, which is why the same piece of meat can be halal in one context and haram in another, based entirely on how it was handled before it reached the plate. Pork. Pork is the most universally recognized food prohibition in Islam, and it is about as absolute as rules get. The prohibition is not limited to bacon or pork chops. It covers every part of the animal, every product derived from it, and every ingredient that traces back to it. Lard used in frying, gelatin made from pig bones, emulsifiers sourced from pork fat. All of it falls under the same ruling. The Quran prohibits it explicitly in at least 4 separate verses: 2:173, 5:3, 6:145, and 16:115, making it one of the most repeated food prohibitions in the entire text. Crucially, there is no version of slaughtering a pig correctly that makes it halal. The animal itself is the problem, not the method. For modern Muslims reading ingredient labels on processed foods, this prohibition extends to certain E-numbers and additives of porcine origin, turning a simple snack into a research exercise. Blood. Blood is explicitly listed in the same Quranic verses as pork, yet it receives far less attention, which means it catches people off guard when they encounter it in food. What is specifically forbidden, according to Quran 6:145, is dam masfu, flowing or poured blood. This is why halal slaughter is designed to drain the blood from the carcass as completely as possible. Black pudding, blood sausage, and any dish where blood is a primary ingredient are all haram. The trace amounts of blood that remain inside cooked meat after proper slaughter are generally considered acceptable by scholarly consensus. The prohibition targets blood as a consumed substance, not every molecule that once flowed through an animal. This distinction matters practically, because without it, even perfectly slaughtered meat would technically be impossible to eat. Dabiha. The method of slaughter is not a technicality. It is a foundational condition. An animal that is otherwise completely halal becomes haram the moment it is killed incorrectly. The process is called dabiha or zabiha, and it requires several things to happen simultaneously. The name of Allah must be pronounced, the phrase Bismillah, at the exact moment of slaughter. The cut must sever the throat, windpipe, and jugular veins in a single swift motion. The animal must be alive and healthy when the blade is applied, and the blood must drain fully from the body afterward. One of the most contested modern debates concerns stunning, the practice of rendering an animal unconscious before slaughter. Some certification bodies, including those operating under certain European regulations, accept pre-slaughter stunning. Stricter scholars reject it entirely on the grounds that a stunned animal may technically be dying before the cut is made, which would reclassify it as carrion. Carrion. An animal that was never properly slaughtered is called meta, carrion, and it is haram regardless of species. Quran 5:3 lists 5 specific causes of death that automatically render an animal forbidden: dying of natural causes, being strangled, being struck by a blow, falling from a height, and being gored by another animal. The point is that none of these involve a human being deliberately taking the animal's life in the prescribed way while invoking Allah's name. There is one well-known exception that surprises most people. Fish and locusts are halal, even if they die without any slaughter at all. A hadith recorded in Ibn Majah, accepted across most schools, explicitly permits these 2 animals dead. We have been permitted 2 dead things: fish and locust. Every other land animal needs the knife and the prayer. A fish pulled dead from a net requires neither. Animals dedicated to other than Allah. This rule covers the spiritual dimension of the slaughter requirement, and it is the reason even a technically correct kill can still produce haram meat. If an animal is slaughtered while the name of an entity other than Allah is invoked, an idol, a deity from another religion, or anything else, the meat is forbidden. Quran 5:3 specifically mentions that which has been dedicated to other than Allah as a category of prohibition, and this was a direct address to pre-Islamic Arabian practices of sacrificing animals at idol altars. In the modern world, this raises genuine questions about ritual meat from non-Abrahamic religious festivals. Scholars differ on how broadly to apply this rule, and many distinguish between meat that was actively dedicated to another deity versus meat that was simply produced by a non-Muslim without any religious invocation at all. The line between the two is where contemporary fatwas tend to focus: alcohol and intoxicants. Quran 590 to 591 calls khamr, wine, and by extension all intoxicants, an abomination from the work of Satan, and the prohibition is not graduated by quantity. A hadith recorded in Sunan Abu Dawud states that whatever intoxicates in large amounts is forbidden, even in small amounts, which means a sip of wine carries the same ruling as a bottle. In practice, this creates real complexity in modern food environments. Vanilla extract, certain breads made with fermented yeast, kombucha with detectable alcohol content, and dishes cooked with wine or beer all sit in a contested gray zone. Medicines containing alcohol are generally handled under the necessity exception when no alternative exists. The alcohol produced incidentally during natural fermentation in things like ripe fruit or bread is typically not considered haram by mainstream scholarly consensus, the reasoning being that no intoxicating effect is realistically produced. But the moment a product can actually intoxicate, the ruling snaps shut. Fanged land animals and birds of prey. This category comes primarily from hadith rather than direct Quranic command, and it covers the predatory end of the animal kingdom. A hadith recorded in both Sahih Muslim and Sunan Abu Dawud, narrated by Ibn Abbas, states that the Prophet prohibited every land animal that uses fangs to hunt and every bird that uses talons to kill. That sweeps in lions, tigers, wolves, leopards, bears, and dogs on land, and eagles, hawks, falcons, and owls in the air. The Hanafi, Shafi'i, and Hanbali schools all accept this prohibition as binding. The Maliki school holds a somewhat more lenient position on certain cases, though the prohibition on the most obvious predators is agreed upon. A minority scholarly view holds that the prohibition is grounded in disgust and cleanliness concerns, rather than being categorically haram in the same weight as pork. But that remains a minority position, not mainstream. Reptiles, rodents, and insects. Few areas of Islamic food law produce as much genuine scholarly disagreement as this one. Most scholars prohibit reptiles and rodents based on hadiths that classify snakes, rats, mice, and similar creatures as fawasik, vermin or harmful creatures, which places them in a category associated with disgust and danger rather than food. The Maliki school, however, permits the dhab, a spiny-tailed desert lizard, based on a hadith in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, describing the Prophet being offered dhab meat and declining to eat it personally, but not forbidding it to others. That is a critical distinction in Islamic jurisprudence: personal avoidance versus legal prohibition. Among insects, locusts are explicitly permitted by hadith. All other insects, including crickets and mealworms now marketed in Western countries as sustainable protein, occupy a genuinely unresolved space, with contemporary scholars only recently beginning to address the question as insect consumption moves from novelty to mainstream: seafood. Quran 596 broadly permits game of the sea, and 3 of the 4 major schools, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali, take that permission at face value, extending it to shrimp, crab, lobster, octopus, clams, and virtually anything else pulled from water. The Hanafi school reads the permission more narrowly, restricting it to fish only in the strict sense. Under the Hanafi position, shrimp and shellfish are considered makruh at minimum, disliked, and many Hanafi scholars classify them as outright haram. This is not a fringe internal debate. Hanafi jurisprudence is the dominant school across South Asia, Central Asia, and Turkey, meaning hundreds of millions of Muslims worldwide apply a significantly more restrictive seafood rule than their Maliki or Shafi'i counterparts. Both positions are grounded in legitimate textual reasoning within their own frameworks, which makes seafood one of the clearest illustrations of how one Quran produces meaningfully different practical outcomes across schools. People of the Book. Quran 5:5 contains a ruling that often surprises non-Muslims and even some Muslims. The food of the people of the book, Christians and Jews, is permitted. This was a deliberate social provision that allowed early Muslim communities to share meals with Jewish and Christian neighbors, without each interaction becoming a jurisprudential crisis. The scholars who read this verse broadly understand it to include meat slaughtered by Christians and Jews, provided the animal was actually slaughtered and not simply killed by other means. Some add the condition that the name of another deity must not have been explicitly invoked over the animal. The modern complication is industrial food production. A chicken processed in a slaughterhouse by workers who happen to be Christian in a country with no religious intent attached to the process, does not obviously fit the original context of the ruling. Contemporary scholars are split on whether the verse's permission is broad enough to cover mass industrial slaughter, or whether the original intent was specifically religious slaughter performed by people of the book in the traditional sense. Darura. Islam's food rules contain their own emergency exit, and it is written directly into the same verses that establish the prohibitions. Quran 2:173, 5:3, and several related verses all conclude with a variation of the same exception. One who is compelled by necessity, without desire or transgression, commits no sin. The Arabic legal principle that captures this is al-darura tubih al-mazurat. Necessities permit the prohibited, and it is one of the 5 foundational maxims of Islamic jurisprudence. In practice, darura is not a convenience clause. It applies when a person faces genuine harm from lack of food. No halal option exists within realistic reach, and only enough haram food is consumed to survive the immediate crisis. It also applies in medical contexts, where pork-derived gelatin in capsules or alcohol in certain medicines may have no readily available halal substitute. The rule is bounded deliberately. The moment an alternative becomes available, the necessity disappears, and so does the permission. Mashbu. Between the clearly green and clearly red sits a large and practically significant gray zone. Mashbu means doubtful or suspect, and the Prophet addressed this category directly in a hadith, recorded in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, comparing a person who grazes their flock near a protected boundary to someone who risks falling into the forbidden. The contemporary list of mashbu items is long. Numbers of uncertain animal origin, rennet in cheese, which may derive from animal stomach lining, meat from restaurants without recognized halal certification, and gelatin-containing products where the source animal is unspecified. The precautionary principle leads many scholars to advise avoiding mashbu items entirely when halal alternatives exist. The ruling on animal rennet specifically is genuinely contested. Some scholars permit it by applying the principle of istihala, meaning the substance has been so thoroughly transformed from its original state that it is no longer legally the same thing. Others reject that reasoning when the original source was itself haram, cross-contamination, and modern certification. The industrial food system was not what 7th century jurists had in mind, and applying centuries-old rules to a chicken nugget processed on a shared production line has produced one of the most practically complex areas of contemporary Islamic food law. The core questions are simple, but the answers are not. Does frying halal chicken in oil previously used for pork make it haram? Does a shared grill contaminate an otherwise permissible meal? Major halal certification bodies, including JAKIM in Malaysia, ESMA in the UAE, the Halal Food Authority in the UK, and IFANCA in the United States, exist precisely to answer these questions institutionally, but they do not always agree with each other, meaning a product certified halal in one country may not be accepted in another. The principle of istihala, associated in classical scholarship with Ibn Taymiyyah, among others, holds that complete chemical or physical transformation of a haram substance can render its derivative product permissible, a position that remains a minority view rejected by most mainstream certification bodies, but invoked frequently in debates about pork-derived gelatin and certain food additives. For the hundreds of millions of Muslims living in non-Muslim majority countries, these are not abstract theological debates. They are decisions made in a grocery aisle every week. If you want to see more, Salah. Salah is the second pillar of Islam, and its Arabic root means connection, a direct line between a human being and God. It was prescribed during the night journey, the Isra wal Miraj, when the Prophet Muhammad was initially given 50 prayers per day. Through a series of negotiations with God, guided by the Prophet Ibrahim, that number was reduced to 5, with the promise that each would carry the reward of 10. The prayer requires ritual purity through wudu, a facing toward Mecca, and a declared intention. It is built from units called raka'at, each a choreographed sequence of standing, bowing, and prostrating. An estimated 1.8 billion Muslims perform this across 5 daily intervals, making it the most consistently repeated religious act on earth. Fajr. Fajr, the dawn prayer, opens the day with 2 obligatory raka'at and a window that closes at sunrise, sometimes as narrow as 60 minutes, depending on the season and how far north you live. Its call to prayer includes a phrase said at no other time of day. As-salatu khayrun minan naum. Prayer is better than sleep, announced into the pre-dawn darkness while most of the city is still unconscious. The Quran singles it out directly, stating in Surah 1778 that the recitation at dawn is witnessed. Interpreted by classical scholars as witnessed by the angels of the night and the angels of the day simultaneously, at the moment they change shifts. Missing it intentionally carries a weight in Islamic tradition that missing dhuhr does not. 2 sunnah rakat before it are described in hadith as more precious than the world and everything in it. Dhuhr. Dhuhr arrives after the sun crosses its peak and lasts several hours, making it the most forgiving prayer in terms of timing. It is 4 obligatory rakat, all performed in silence. No audible recitation, just the worshipper and the words. On Fridays, it disappears entirely, replaced by Jumu'ah for Muslim men, making Friday the only day the full dhuhr is not prayed at all. 4 sunnah rakat before it, and 2 after, are among the confirmed supplementary prayers the Prophet maintained consistently. It is the longest of the standard daily prayers, and its silence gives it a quality different from Fajr or Maghrib. There is no external anchor, no voice connecting the congregation, just rows of people moving through identical sequences in their own private quiet. Asr, the afternoon prayer, is 4 raka'at performed silently, and it is surrounded by more jurisprudential controversy than any other daily prayer. The Hanafi school calculates its start time using a different shadow length formula than the Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali schools, a difference that can produce a gap of over an hour between the 2 positions. The entire 103rd chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Asr, is named for it, and some scholars argue God swears by this specific prayer in its opening verse. Its warning is the starkest of any prayer. A hadith in Sahih Bukhari states that whoever misses Asr, it is as though he lost his family and his wealth. Arriving before the sun sets, even by a single rakah, is enough to count it as on time. Maghrib. Maghrib begins the moment the sun disappears below the horizon and has the shortest window of all 5 prayers, roughly 60 to 90 minutes before it closes. 3 obligatory raka'at, the only odd number in the daily prayers, giving it a structure unlike any other. The first 2 are recited aloud, the third in silence, and between them sits a full seated position that breaks the rhythm in a way you feel physically after a day of silent prayers. During Ramadan, the Maghrib Adhan is the sound that ends the fast, the precise moment across the Muslim world when water and dates are raised simultaneously by hundreds of millions of people. Its narrow window has made it historically the prayer scholars most warn against delaying, because unlike dhuhr, there's almost no margin. Isha. Isha closes the day with 4 silent raka'at and a window that technically extends until midnight, or until dawn according to a minority scholarly position. The Prophet reportedly disliked sleeping before it and talking excessively after it, framing it as a threshold, the moment the day ends for a Muslim, not when the clock does. Despite its flexibility, it is by most accounts the most commonly missed of the 5 daily prayers. Its timing disappears entirely in extreme northern latitudes during summer, a problem Islamic legal bodies, including the European Council for Fatwa and Research, have issued formal rulings on, creating multiple calculation methods for Muslims in places like Finland and northern Canada. What follows it is witr, and the 2 are inseparable in practice. Sunnah Mu'akkada. The confirmed supplementary prayers, known as Sunnah Mu'akkada, are 12 raka'at attached to specific daily prayers, 2 before Fajr, 4 before dhuhr, and 2 after Maghrib, and 2 after Isha. They are not obligatory, but abandoning them regularly without reason is considered blameworthy. The two sunnah before Fajr are described in a hadith from Sahih Muslim as more valuable than the world and everything in it, a claim that stops you if you think about it, since that includes everything that has ever existed or will exist on earth. A hadith in Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah states that maintaining all 12 consistently earns a house in paradise. They function, according to some scholars, as a spiritual correction, compensating for any deficiency in the obligatory prayers that preceded them. Sunnah Ghair Muakkada. Beneath the confirmed supplementary prayers sits a quieter layer. The non-emphasized optional prayers, known as Sunnah Ghair Muakkada. These include 4 raka'at before Asr, 2 before Maghrib, and 2 before Isha, among others, though the exact list varies by madhab. Performing them earns reward. Skipping them earns nothing negative. They represent a middle zone in Islamic worship that most introductory education never reaches. Neither obligatory nor purely voluntary, but something in between that the 4 major schools classify differently enough that what one tradition calls confirmed, another calls non-emphasized. Their existence reflects a core Islamic idea. Obligation is the floor, not the ceiling. The space between the minimum and the maximum is vast, and these prayers live in that space quietly. Witr. Witr is performed after Isha and before Fajr, always ending on an odd number of rakat. The name itself means odd. It can be 1 rakah, 3, 5, 7, or more. The Prophet never abandoned it, even while traveling, which places it in a different category from most supplementary prayers. The Hanafi school considers it wajib, a legal category unique to that school sitting between obligatory and recommended, while the majority of scholars consider it sunnah muakkada. Its final rak'ah contains the kunut supplication, a specific dua recited in a raised hands position before bowing, used particularly in the second half of Ramadan in many traditions. Whether a missed witr needs to be made up, and how, is debated. It is the prayer that formally closes the night. Tarawih. Tarawih is prayed only in Ramadan, after Isha and before witr, and it is the prayer that fills mosques to capacity once a year in cities where they stand empty the other 11 months. The number of raka'at is one of the most discussed numbers in Islamic practice. 8 or 20, depending on which tradition you follow. The Prophet initiated congregational Tarawih, and then deliberately stopped, according to a narration in Sahih Bukhari, out of concern it would become obligatory. It was Umar ibn al-Khattab who later revived and formalized it. In Mecca and Medina, 20 raka'at are performed each night of Ramadan, completing the entire Quran, all 604 pages, distributed across 30 nights. The night the recitation finishes, Khatm al-Quran, is often the most emotionally charged moment of the Islamic calendar. Tahajjud. Tahajjud is performed in the last third of the night, after sleeping, and no voluntary prayer carries more weight in Islamic tradition. There is no fixed number, 2, 4, 8 rakat, always in pairs, but the time matters more than the count. A hadith in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim describes the last third of the night as the time when God descends to the lowest heaven and asks who is calling upon him, who is asking forgiveness, who is seeking provision, and responds. The Quran commands it directly for the Prophet in Surah 1779, making it the only voluntary prayer with a Quranic obligation attached, and voluntary only for everyone else. Classical scholars treated it as the clearest indicator of a person's private relationship with God, because nobody is watching and nothing is requiring it. Duha. Duha is prayed after the sun has fully risen, roughly 15 to 20 minutes after sunrise, and lasts until just before dur. Minimum 2 rakat, with 8 considered particularly virtuous. A hadith in Sahih Muslim frames it in terms of the human body. Every joint owes a charitable act each morning, and 2 rakat of duha satisfies the entire debt. All 360 joints settled at once. It is also called Salat al-Awabin, The prayer of those who constantly return to God, a name that gives it a character, different from the structured daily prayers. Because it falls during normal waking hours rather than at dawn or midnight, it is among the most accessible of the voluntary prayers for working people. It asks for almost nothing in terms of scheduling and returns, according to the texts, an extraordinary amount. Ishraq. Ishraq is performed at the very beginning of that same morning window, 15 to 20 minutes after sunrise, and is either a distinct prayer or an earlier version of duha, depending on which scholar you ask. What makes it remarkable is the reward attached to the ritual that precedes it. A person who prays Fajr in congregation, then sits in the mosque in remembrance of God until the sun has fully risen, then prays 2 raka'at, receives a reward described in a narration in Tirmidhi as equivalent to a complete Hajj and Umrah. The hadith's grading is debated. Some classify it as Hasan, others as weak, but it has been practiced continuously across Muslim-majority societies for centuries. That a 45-minute commitment might carry the reward of a pilgrimage to Mecca is the kind of equation that changes how people spend their mornings. Tahiyyatul Masjid. Tahiyyatul Masjid, the mosque greeting prayer, is 2 raka'at performed before sitting down upon entering any mosque. The Prophet commanded in explicit hadith that no one should sit until they have prayed them. Unlike almost every other prayer, it is triggered by location, not time. It can be performed at any hour, making it one of the few prayers that defies the structured daily rhythm. The Shafi'i school holds that it should be prayed even during the 3 normally prohibited times, at sunrise, at the sun's zenith, and at sunset, because the sanctity of the mosque overrides the general prohibition. Most people who grow up with a basic Islamic education never encounter this prayer in any formal instruction, despite it being directly commanded in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. You walk in, you pray, then you sit. Salatul Janazah. Salatul Janazah, the funeral prayer, is a collective obligation. If enough Muslims perform it over the deceased, all are absolved. If no one does, all who knew and could have attended are sinful. It contains no ruku and no sujud, no bowing, no prostrating, making it structurally unlike any other Islamic prayer. It is 4 standing takbirs, a declaration of Allahu Akbar 4 times, with specific supplications for the deceased between them. The Prophet performed a version of it in absentia for the Negus of Abyssinia, a Christian king who had sheltered early Muslims, establishing what scholars point to as evidence that the prayer can sometimes be performed for those at a distance. The body lies in front of the rose. The prayer is brief. The silence between each Allahu Akbar is its own kind of weight. Salatul Jumu'ah. Salatul Jumu'ah replaces Dhuhr entirely on Fridays and is obligatory for free, adult, resident Muslim men. The only prayer whose obligation is tied simultaneously to gender, legal status, and geography. Surah al-Jumu'ah, chapter 62 of the Quran, commands believers directly. When the call is made, hasten to the remembrance of God and leave your trade. 2 rakat follow 2 khutbahs, sermons that are considered part of the prayer itself, not a preamble to it. A hadith narrated in Abu Dawud warns that missing 3 consecutive Jumu'ah, prayers without excuse, results in a seal being placed over the heart, though the grading of this narration is debated by scholars. It is worth noting that Jumu'ah is not an Islamic Sabbath. Commerce and work resume immediately after the prayer ends, and the Quran says so explicitly in the same passage that commands attendance. Salatul Eid. Salatul Eid is performed twice a year, on Eid al-Fitr, the morning after Ramadan ends, and on Eid al-Adha, the morning of the Feast of Sacrifice. 2 rakat, with 7 extra takbirs in the first and 5 in the second, according to the Shafi'i and Hanbali schools, though the Hanafi school counts differently. The Prophet preferred an open field over the mosque for this prayer specifically, and this practice continues today in countries where tens of thousands gather in stadiums, parks, and city squares at dawn. Women and children are explicitly encouraged to attend. Classical hadith texts record that even menstruating women were told to come and stand apart, to be present for the gathering without participating in the prayer itself. On Eid al-Adha, the animal sacrifice should not precede the prayer, according to most scholars. The prayer comes first. Salatul Istisqa. Salatul Istisqa is the rain prayer. 2 raka'at performed outdoors during drought, with the imam delivering 2 khutbahs, and then, in one of the most visually striking ritual acts in Islam, reversing his cloak, turning it inside out as a symbolic appeal for circumstances to change. The Prophet performed it in an open field, and the hadith narrated in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim reports that rain began falling before the congregation had left the prayer ground. It can be repeated across multiple consecutive days if rain does not come. Saudi Arabia and other Muslim-majority states have issued official national declarations of istisqa during recent droughts, making it one of the few ancient Islamic rituals still enacted at the level of state policy. It is drought made into liturgy, collective helplessness formalized into form and gesture. Salatul Kusuf and Kusuf. The eclipse prayers, Kusuf for solar eclipses and Kusuf for lunar, are among the most structurally unusual prayers in the Islamic system, because each rak'ah contains 2 bowing positions instead of 1, making every unit of prayer twice as long as normal. The Prophet used the solar eclipse explicitly to correct a pre-Islamic belief. A hadith in both Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim records him declaring that the sun and moon do not eclipse for the death or birth of any person. The prayer continues until the eclipse ends, meaning its length is set by an astronomical event, not a muezzin or a clock. For a lunar eclipse, whether the prayer requires congregation or can be performed individually is disputed. The Shafi'i school encourages congregation, while the Hanafi school treats it as individual. The sky itself determines when it is over. Salatul Istikhara. Salatul Istikhara is 2 raka'at, followed by a specific supplication, asking God to facilitate a matter if it is good, and to remove it if it is harmful. A formal surrender of the worshipper's own preference to divine knowledge. The Prophet taught it according to Jabir ibn Abdullah, who narrated in Sahih Bukhari that he taught it for every matter the way he taught Quranic surahs, meaning for everything, not just marriage. The most common misconception surrounding it is that it should produce a dream or a feeling pointing toward the right choice. Scholars across traditions correct this consistently. The outcome that unfolds afterward, the door that opens or closes, the circumstance that becomes easy or difficult, is the answer. It can be repeated. There is no single correct number of times. The decision that eventually happens is the response. Salatul Tawbah. Salatul Tawbah is 2 rakat performed after committing a sin, followed by sincere repentance. And its hadith, transmitted by Abu Bakr al-Siddiq and found in Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi, makes a direct promise. Any Muslim who sins, performs wudu, prays 2 rakat, and seeks forgiveness will be forgiven by God. The hadith is classified as sahih by Al-Albani. There is no fixed time for it and no designated window. It is performed whenever the need arises, day or night. The repentance itself requires 3 things, according to scholarly consensus: genuine remorse, ceasing the act, and a sincere intention not to return to it. The prayer is purely remedial, a reset built into the system. It is not announced, not congregational, not attached to any calendar. It exists entirely between a person and what they did. Salatul Tasbih. Salatul Tasbih is 4 raka'at containing 300 repetitions of a single glorification phrase. Subhana Allahi walhamdulillahi wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar. Distributed precisely across every standing, bowing, and prostrating position in each rak'ah. 15 in the standing recitation, 10 rising from bowing, 10 in each prostration, 10 between the 2 prostrations. The Prophet taught it to his uncle Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, according to a narration in Abu Dawud and Ibn Majah, and described it as causing God to forgive all sins, past and future, minor and major, deliberate and accidental. Its hadith authenticity is one of the most debated in Islamic scholarship. Ibn al-Salah and others questioned it, while al-Hakim authenticated it. It is recommended once daily, or weekly, or monthly, or yearly, or at minimum once in a lifetime. A flexibility that is itself unusual. Across South Asian and Southeast Asian Muslim communities, it remains widely practiced. The prohibited times and the architecture of the day. 3 windows exist in every day when voluntary prayers are forbidden. At the moment of sunrise, when the sun stands exactly at its zenith, and at the moment of sunset. The Prophet explained in a hadith narrated in Sahih Muslim that these are the times when those who worship the sun directed their devotion toward it. And Islam marks itself as different by prohibiting prayer at those exact moments. Missed obligatory prayers, according to the majority scholarly position, can be made up even within these windows, though the Hanafi school is more restrictive. What this framework reveals, when placed beside everything that came before it, is that the 5 daily prayers are not 5 additions to a secular day. They are 5 anchors around which the day is constructed. The time between them is not free time with prayer inserted. It is prayer time with everything else arranged around it. Hanafi school. The Hanafi school is the oldest surviving Sunni legal school, and by some estimates, the most widely followed legal tradition in the world today, covering roughly a third to nearly half of all Sunni Muslims. It was founded by Imam Abu Hanifa, born in Kufa, Iraq, around 699 CE, in one of the most cosmopolitan cities of the early Islamic world. That urban environment matters because it shaped everything about how the school thinks. Kufa was a melting pot of cultures, religions, and legal problems that nobody had faced before, and Abu Hanifa's response was to lean heavily on reason, analogical deduction known as qiyas, and independent legal opinion known as rai, alongside the Quran and Hadith. The result was a school unusually comfortable with novel legal questions. Today it dominates Turkey, South Asia, Central Asia, and the Balkans, and it forms the legal backbone of hundreds of millions of people's religious practice, from a Pakistani farmer's inheritance rules to an Ottoman imperial court's criminal code. Maliki school. The Maliki school emerged from a completely different environment, and that difference is its defining feature. Founded by Imam Malik ibn Anas in Medina around the mid-8th century CE, the school rests on a premise as simple as it is bold. The people of Medina, the city where the Prophet lived, prayed, and governed, preserved his actual practice in their daily lives, generation after generation, like a living hadith. Malik compiled this insight into Al-Muwatta, one of the earliest systematic collections of Islamic law and prophetic tradition, written around 770 CE. Wherever it spread, which included North Africa, West Africa, and the courts of medieval Andalusia in Muslim Spain, it carried that Medinan conservatism with it. The school is methodologically careful, resistant to pure rationalist speculation, and deeply rooted in the idea that authentic practice, passed down through living communities, carries legal weight that no textbook argument can override. Shafi'i school. If Hanafi built the house and Maliki furnished it with tradition, Shafi'i drew the architectural blueprints that made all later construction possible. Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, born around 767 CE, was himself a student of Imam Malik in Medina before eventually breaking new ground entirely. His landmark work, the Risala, written around 820 CE, is widely considered the first formal treatise on Islamic legal theory, Usul al-Fiqh, essentially inventing the systematic framework that every subsequent school of law, including the ones that came before it, would be retroactively analyzed through. Al-Shafi'i struck a deliberate middle path between the Hanafi confidence in reason and the Maliki attachment to Medinan practice, insisting that the hadith of the Prophet carried binding legal authority even beyond Medina. The school today dominates Egypt, East Africa, and Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, the single most populous Muslim country on earth, home to well over 200 million Muslims. Hanbali School. The Hanbali School is the most scripturally conservative of the four major Sunni legal schools, and its founder paid a physical price for that conviction. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, born in Baghdad in 780 CE, was deeply suspicious of rationalist legal reasoning, and especially of using Greek-influenced philosophy to resolve theological questions. His position put him on a collision course with the Abbasid Caliphate during the Mihna, an inquisition that ran roughly from 833 to 848 CE, during which state-backed Mutazilite theologians demanded that scholars declare the Quran to be a created, not eternal object. Ibn Hanbal refused. He was imprisoned and flogged. He still refused. That stubbornness made him a symbol of traditional Sunni resistance, and his school, which prioritizes Quran and Hadith above rational speculation, remained a minority tradition for centuries until the 18th century, when it became the theological foundation for a revolutionary alliance in the Arabian Peninsula that would reshape the modern world. Mutazilism. Mutazilism is the great rationalist experiment of early Islamic theology, and for about 20 years it was the official intellectual position of one of the most powerful empires on earth. Emerging from Basra and Baghdad in the 8th century CE, the Mutazilites believed that reason was not merely a tool for understanding revelation, but a primary source of truth in its own right. They argued the Quran was created in time, not eternal, that God by his very nature cannot do evil, and that human beings possess genuine free will. All positions derived from Greek logical frameworks applied to Islamic theology. Abbasid caliphs al-Ma'mun and al-Mutasim backed these positions as state doctrine during the Mihna from approximately 827 to 848 CE, attempting to impose them by force. That experiment collapsed, but Mutazilism never fully disappeared. Its intellectual legacy seeded centuries of Islamic philosophy, and traces of neo-Mutazilite thinking continue surfacing in modern Islamic reform movements. Asharism. Asharism is the school that answered Mutazilism, and it did so from the inside. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, born around 874 CE, was himself trained as a Mutazilite before making a dramatic, reportedly very public break with the school, announcing from a mosque pulpit, according to tradition, that he was abandoning rationalist theology without abandoning rational argument. The distinction matters enormously. Asharism does not reject reason. It uses reason rigorously, but insists that revelation holds final authority in all ultimate questions about God's nature. The Quran, in Ash'ari theology, is eternal in its essence, but expressed through created human language, a careful compromise that diffused the most explosive theological controversy of the era. The school became the dominant theological framework of Sunni Islam. Al-Azhar University in Cairo, founded in 970 CE, and still the most prestigious institution in Sunni Islamic learning, operates within an Ash'ari framework. So does virtually every major Sunni seminary, from Morocco to Malaysia. Maturidism. Maturidism is Asharism's parallel school, its close twin and occasional rival, and it is dramatically underappreciated in Western scholarship relative to its actual reach. Founded by Abu Mansur al-Maturidi in Samarkand, in present-day Uzbekistan, around the early 10th century CE, the school shares most of Asharism's conclusions, but arrives at a few of them differently. Maturidists grant slightly more independent weight to reason in the realm of ethics, holding that humans can, without revelation, recognize certain basic moral truths. That is a small, but philosophically significant difference. What made Maturidism enormous in scale was geography. It became the official theological companion of the Hanafi legal school, and so, wherever Hanafi jurisprudence traveled, which included the entire Ottoman Empire, spanning from 1299 to 1922 CE, Maturidi theology traveled with it. Hundreds of millions of Muslims across Turkey, Central Asia, and South Asia have practiced within a Hanafi Maturidi framework, without most of them ever learning that combination had a name. Twelver Shia Islam. Twelver Shia Islam is the largest branch of Shia Islam and a complete civilization in its own right, with its own theology, legal school, sacred geography, and calendar of mourning and commemoration. Twelvers believe that the Prophet Muhammad was succeeded by 12 divinely appointed imams, beginning with his cousin and son-in-law Ali ibn Abi Talib, and that leadership of the Muslim community was never legitimately transferred to the caliphs who ruled in historical fact. Their legal tradition, called Ja'fari fiqh, was codified by the sixth imam, Ja'far al-Sadiq, who lived from approximately 702 to 765 CE, and whose legal and theological teachings form the jurisprudential core of the school. The 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi, is believed to have entered a state of occultation, a hidden presence, in 874 CE, and is expected to return at the end of times. Today, Twelver Shia Islam is dominant in Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and Bahrain, with significant communities across Lebanon, Pakistan, and India. Ismaili Islam. Ismaili Islam split from the Twelver tradition over a single dynasty-defining question. Who was the rightful seventh Imam? When Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq died in 765 CE, Ismailis recognized his son Ismail, who had predeceased him, through Ismail's son Muhammad ibn Ismail, rather than following the line that led to the Twelver succession. That divergence produced a tradition with a distinct intellectual character, emphasizing esoteric interpretation, the idea that every outward religious text contains a hidden, symbolic inner meaning accessible through the living Imam. The most spectacular historical expression of Ismaili power was the Fatimid Caliphate, which ruled from 909 to 1171 CE, founded Cairo in 969 CE, and established Al-Azhar, which began as an Ismaili institution before later becoming the center of Sunni learning. Today, the largest Ismaili community, the Nizari branch, is led by the Aga Khan, a living hereditary imam with global communities concentrated across East Africa, South Asia, and Central Asia. Zaydi Islam. Zaydi Islam is the oldest of the Shia schools, and, theologically, the one most difficult to distinguish from Sunni Islam at first glance. It takes its name from Zayd ibn Ali, grandson of Hussein, who launched an armed revolt against the Umayyad Caliphate in 740 CE and was killed in the attempt. Unlike Twelvers, Zaydists do not believe in a hidden or infallible imam. Their imam must be a living, publicly active leader who asserts his rights, is descended from Ali and Fatima, and is willing to fight for justice. That is a doctrine built for the mountains, and the mountains of northern Yemen became Zaydism's heartland. The Zaydi imamate in Yemen endured, with significant interruptions, from the 9th century until the Republican Revolution of 1962, making it one of the longest surviving Islamic political institutions in history. Yemen's contemporary Houthi movement draws from a Zaydi background, though its ideology extends well beyond classical Zaydi jurisprudence and theology. Sufism. Sufism is not a separate sect, but a spiritual path running through the interior of Islam, ancient in its roots and vast in its reach, and it is arguably the single most important vehicle through which Islam actually spread across the world. Emerging formally in the 8th and 9th centuries CE, Sufism, known in Arabic as tasawwuf, centers on the purification of the self, the direct experiential knowledge of God, and love as the animating force of religious life. It organizes itself into orders called tariqas, among them the Qadiri, Naqshbandi, Chishti, Shadhili, and the Mevlevi, the order of whirling dervishes founded by the followers of Jalal al-Din Rumi after his death in 1273 CE. The scholar Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, born 1058 CE, performed the intellectual feat of reconciling Sufi spirituality with Sunni legal orthodoxy in his monumental work Ihya Ulum al-Din, written around 1095 CE. Wandering Sufi teachers, not armies, were primarily responsible for Islamization across sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. Wahhabism and Salafism. Wahhabism and Salafism are related but distinct, frequently conflated, and probably the most globally consequential Islamic intellectual movements of the past 3 centuries. Wahhabism was founded by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, born in the Najd region of Arabia in 1703, who argued that over a millennium of Islamic civilization had been corrupted by innovation, saint veneration, and tomb worship, and that a return to the Quran and authenticated hadith interpreted with strict literalism was the only valid path. In 1744 CE, he forged a political alliance with the tribal chief Muhammad ibn Saud, a pact whose descendants created the modern Saudi state. Salafism is a broader global movement, sharing the methodological emphasis on emulating the Salaf, the first 3 generations of Muslims, without always sharing Wahhabism's specific Arabian political context. After the 1973 oil embargo dramatically expanded Saudi wealth, Wahhabi Salafi literature, mosques, and schools were funded across the globe on a scale that reshaped Islamic practice from Indonesia to West Africa. The movement is internally diverse, ranging from quietist scholars who avoid politics entirely to a small but notorious jihadist fringe whose ideology represents a radical departure from the classical tradition. Shahada. The Shahada is the first and most fundamental pillar, a simple declaration that transforms someone into a Muslim. The Arabic phrase is Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, which translates to, I bear witness that there is no God but God, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. This testimony has 2 parts. The first rejects all forms of polytheism and affirms absolute monotheism, called Tawheed, while the second recognizes Muhammad as the final prophet in a line that includes Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. To convert to Islam, a person need only recite this declaration with sincere conviction and understanding, ideally with 2 Muslim witnesses present. The Shahada appears everywhere in Islamic life. It's whispered into a newborn's ear as their first words, recited during each of the 5 daily prayers, inscribed on the Saudi Arabian flag in white script against green fabric, and carved into mosque walls in beautiful Arabic calligraphy. Muslims strive to make it their final words before death. The call to prayer, or adhan, which echoes from mosques 5 times daily, proclaims this declaration to entire neighborhoods. Its brevity makes Islam remarkably accessible. Anyone can become Muslim by sincerely speaking fewer than 20 words. Salat. Salat is the second pillar, requiring Muslims to pray 5 times daily at prescribed moments that follow the sun's movement across the sky. The 5 prayers are Fajr at dawn, Dhuhr at midday, Asr in the afternoon, Maghrib at sunset, and Isha at night. Each prayer involves specific physical movements: standing, bowing, prostrating with forehead touching the ground, and sitting. Before praying, Muslims must perform wudu, a ritual washing of the hands, face, arms, and feet with water to achieve purification. During prayer, Muslims must face the Kaaba in Mecca, a direction called the Qibla, which smartphone apps and mosque mihrabs now indicate from anywhere on earth. Each prayer consists of units called rakats. Fajr has 2, Dhuhr has 4, Asr has 4, Maghrib has 3, and Isha has 4. Every prayer includes recitation of Al-Fatiha, the Quran's opening chapter, plus additional verses. The entire process takes 5 to 10 minutes per prayer, totaling roughly 30 to 50 minutes daily. The adhan, or call to prayer, announces each prayer time from mosque minarets or speakers, reminding Muslims to pause their activities. Prayers can be performed individually, anywhere clean, often on a prayer rug, or in congregation at a mosque, with Friday's Jumu'ah prayer being a communal obligation for men. Islamic law provides exemptions for travelers, the sick, and those facing genuine hardship. Zakat. Zakat is the third pillar, a mandatory annual charitable payment that purifies a Muslim's wealth and redistributes resources to those in need. Unlike voluntary charity called Saddaka, Zakat is obligatory, functioning almost like a religious tax with specific rules about who pays and who receives. The standard rate is 2.5% of accumulated wealth that has been held for one full lunar year, but this only applies if your savings exceed the nisab, a minimum threshold equivalent to approximately 3 ounces of gold or 21 ounces of silver. The Quran specifies 8 categories of people eligible to receive zakat: the poor, the needy, those who administer zakat collection, those whose hearts are being reconciled to Islam, those in bondage or slavery, those in debt, those working in God's cause, and travelers in need. This is mentioned explicitly in Quran 960. Zakat applies to different types of wealth at varying rates. Cash, gold, and silver are taxed at 2.5%, while agricultural produce is taxed at 5 to 10%, depending on whether the land requires irrigation. You cannot give zakat to your own parents, children, or spouse, as you're already obligated to support them. In some Muslim-majority countries, governments collect zakat officially, while in others it remains an individual responsibility, often paid during Ramadan when charitable giving increases across the community. Psalm. Psalm is the 4th pillar, requiring all able Muslims to fast from dawn until sunset throughout Ramadan, the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar. The fast is total. No food, no water, no smoking, and no sexual relations during daylight hours for 29 or 30 consecutive days. Each day, the fast begins at Fajr, the moment when you can distinguish a white thread from a black thread in the natural light, and ends at Maghrib when the sun sets. Muslims often break their fast with dates and water, following the Prophet Muhammad's reported tradition, in a meal called iftar that brings families and communities together. Before dawn, many eat suhoor, a pre-fast meal that provides energy for the day ahead. During the night hours, Muslims pray special Tarawih prayers at mosques, often reciting the entire Quran over the month. Because Islam follows a lunar calendar that's about 11 days shorter than the solar year, Ramadan shifts earlier each year, meaning Muslims experience it during different seasons throughout their lives. In equatorial regions, fasting might last 11 to 12 hours, while Muslims in northern locations can face fasts exceeding 20 hours during summer months. The month concludes with Eid al-Fitr, a 3-day celebration. Islamic law exempts travelers, the sick, the elderly, pregnant women, nursing mothers, and menstruating women from fasting, though they must make up missed days later, or, if permanently unable, feed one poor person for each day missed. Hajj. Hajj is the 5th pillar, a pilgrimage to Mecca required once in every Muslim's lifetime if they are physically and financially capable. This journey must occur during specific days of Dhul Hijjah, the 12th Islamic month, drawing approximately 2 to 3 million Muslims annually to Saudi Arabia for what becomes the world's largest religious gathering. The pilgrimage involves a series of rituals performed over 5 to 6 days at multiple sacred sites. Pilgrims enter a state of spiritual purity called ihram, with men wearing 2 simple white unstitched cloths and women wearing modest clothing, symbolizing equality before God regardless of wealth or status. The key rituals include tawaf, circling the Kaaba 7 times counterclockwise, sa'i, walking 7 times between the hills of Safa and Marwa, standing in prayer at Mount Arafat on the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah, which is considered the most crucial ritual that cannot be missed, stoning 3 pillars at Mina that represent Satan's temptations, and performing an animal sacrifice. The Kaaba itself is a cube-shaped structure approximately 13.1 meters high, covered in a black silk cloth embroidered with gold Quranic verses called the Kiswa, which is replaced annually. Completing Hajj earns Muslims the honorary title Haji, and many describe the experience as the spiritual peak of their lives. The pilgrimage costs vary widely, from $5,000 to $15,000 depending on the pilgrim's country of origin and chosen accommodations, and Saudi Arabia manages the massive crowds by issuing limited visas distributed by country quotas. The fast: no food, no water, no cigarettes, no music, no lying, no gossip, sunrise to sunset, for 30 days, and over 1 billion people do it voluntarily. Sawm, the fast, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, made obligatory in 624 CE, 2 years after the Prophet Muhammad's migration to Medina. The Quran instructs it plainly: fast, so that you may attain taqwa, a word that translates roughly as God consciousness, the particular clarity that arrives only when the noise stops. But here's what nobody mentions. The fast is not just the stomach. Technically, a lie breaks the spiritual value of the fast just as surely as a meal does. The tongue, the eyes, the hands, the mind, all of it is included. The body is the easy part. Hunger is just the first door. Every pang is a notification, a small, insistent reminder that you are not in control, that the body is borrowed, and that somewhere, someone is hungry, without the guarantee of anything waiting at sundown. Sawm doesn't make you spiritual. It makes you honest, which might be the same thing. 1 month, 30 sunrises, 1 billion alarms set before dawn, and somehow the hardest part isn't the hunger, it's the thirst. But here's the twist. You can endure every hour of that hunger and still fast completely wrong. Because the fast doesn't begin at sunrise. It begins the night before, in the dark, with a single silent decision nobody will ever see. Niyyah, the invisible prerequisite. In Islamic jurisprudence, niyyah must be made each night before Fajr, the dawn prayer, specifically for the fast of the following day, according to the Hanbali, Maliki, and Shafi'i scholarly traditions. Without it, the act is technically hollow. 2 people can fast identically from the outside, same hunger, same hours, same sundown meal, and one is worshiping while the other is simply dieting. The month knows the difference. What makes niyyah genuinely unsettling is that it cannot be performed, photographed, or delegated. There is no leaderboard, no proof of completion. In a world that has built entire industries around visible devotion, the post, the caption, the aesthetic, Ramadan's most critical act produces nothing external at all. It lives below behavior, in the motivation beneath the motivation, in the reason behind the reason, which means every person in Ramadan has to decide, alone, every single night, whether they actually mean it. The fast begins before sunrise, but it really begins the moment you decide, quietly, in the dark. Why? And then the alarm goes off, and the whole silent architecture of intention collapses into something far more chaotic, far more human, and smelling, somehow, of lentil soup at 4 a.m., suhoor, and iftar. 2 meals bracket the entire day. One eaten in the gray dark before the world wakes. The other consumed the moment the sun drops below the horizon. And both of them, inexplicably, taste better than anything eaten any other time of year. Suhoor, the pre-dawn meal, is described in hadith recorded in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim as a blessed meal. Eat it, the Prophet advised, for in it there is blessing. It is quiet and slightly surreal, this meal eaten half asleep with the weight of the day ahead pressing in from all sides. Iftar, the breaking of the fast at Maghrib, is its opposite. Loud, communal, emotionally charged in ways people don't anticipate. A table where estrangements quietly dissolve because the food is there and the day is finally over. But here's what the photographs never capture. The first thing consumed at iftar is not the feast. It's a date. Small, brown, almost ceremonially plain. Given first before the rice and the soup and the conversation. A fruit, carrying the oldest meaning on the table. And then, after the date, water. Just water. People who fast describe that first sip at iftar as the single most viscerally appreciated moment in the entire month. Not the meal, the water, which tells you everything the fast was actually teaching. Survival chance? Excellent. Emotional experience. Genuinely hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. But suhoor and iftar, that's the face of Ramadan that photographs well. What happens between them is where the real levels begin, the three tiers. According to the medieval Islamic scholar Al-Ghazali, writing in his Ihya Ulum al-Din, Revival of the Religious Sciences, one of the most influential texts in Islamic intellectual history, there are three categories of fasting, stacked in ascending difficulty. The first tier, you don't eat, you don't drink, you meet the legal requirement. This is the floor, not the ceiling. The second tier, you also restrain the tongue from lying, the eyes from what they shouldn't linger on, the hands from what they have no right to take. The body obeys, and the senses follow. The third tier, the fast of the heart, asks you to strip away attachment itself. Ego, status anxiety, the hunger for recognition, the craving to be seen as someone who is doing this correctly. Al-Ghazali writes that this third fast is the fast of the prophets. Almost nobody achieves it. Most Ramadan content, the cooking videos, the decoration guides, the iftar table aesthetics, lives entirely within Tier 1, which Al-Ghazali would gently suggest is a bit like buying running shoes and never leaving the house. 30 days, 3 tiers. The body quits asking for food by day 5. The self never stops asking for everything else. And then, when the table is cleared and the day is finally over, some people don't go to sleep. They go to the mosque. For hours. By choice. Tarawih. After a full day of fasting, some people stand in voluntary night prayer for 2 to 3 hours. Every night. For 30 nights. Not because it's required, but because they want to. Tarawih traces back to the Prophet himself, who prayed these voluntarily, and then, according to Sahih al-Bukhari, stopped leading them in congregation out of concern the community would assume they were obligatory. In mosques with a hafiz, someone who has memorized all 6,236 verses of the Quran, attendees stand and listen to the entire text recited aloud, section by section, across the month. The physical demand alone, on a body that hasn't eaten since dawn, is significant. But the texture of it is harder to quantify. Rows of people in a darkened hall, the air carrying the faint warmth of collective breath, a single voice moving through ancient Arabic in a rhythm that does something to a room full of people who mean it. Something documented even by non-Arabic speakers who've attended open mosque nights and left unable to fully explain what happened. Tarawih is the part of Ramadan that can't be captured mid-act. You're standing in a row, bowing, rising, standing again. It looks like nothing from outside. From inside, people describe it as the closest thing the month offers to genuine silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of self-consciousness. 30 nights, 3 hours each. The mosques are full. But even the most devoted Tarawih worshipper is aiming at a moving target. Because the most sacred night of Ramadan has no fixed address. Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power. Mentioned directly in the Quran in Surah al-Qadr. This is the night the Quran began its revelation, described as better than 1,000 months of worship. 1,000 months is 83 years, roughly a full human lifetime. One sincere night of worship on Laylat al-Qadr is described as its equivalent. According to Hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, it falls in one of the odd-numbered nights of the last 10 days of Ramadan, the 21st, 23rd, 25th, 27th, or 29th, with the 27th most commonly cited, though scholars note this is not confirmed. The concealment of the exact date is, in classical scholarship, deliberate. You cannot wait it out. You cannot bookmark it. You can only keep showing up, depleted and fasting, night after night, and hope you're present when it arrives. The divine logic is almost adversarial in its elegance. The most valuable night is hidden inside the most exhausting stretch of the month, arriving when you have the least to give, and asking whether you still mean it anyway. Somewhere in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, a door opens. You won't be told which night. The only strategy is to be awake for all of them. Some people take that instruction literally and disappear from the world entirely. Itikaf. For the last 10 days of Ramadan, some Muslims move into the mosque and don't leave. No phone, no work, no home, just prayer, Quran, and the hunt for one night. Itikaf, spiritual seclusion, is a confirmed prophetic practice documented in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. The Prophet observed it in the last 10 days of Ramadan every year until his death. The person in itikaf does not leave except for biological necessity. They eat there, sleep on the floor there, worship there, exist there, in a state that has no program, no outcome metrics, no audience. In an age of curated wellness retreats and scheduled mindfulness, itikaf is the anti-aesthetic. There is nothing to show. The mutakif, the person in seclusion, sleeps on stone or carpet, eats simply, and spends days that look, from outside, like absolute stillness. From inside, according to accounts across centuries, it feels like the most clarifying 10 days of the year. Because itikaf's only purpose is the removal of every single layer between the person and whatever they're actually looking for. No role to play, no identity to maintain, no noise. Just the question the whole month has been building toward, finally asked, in a room with no exit. Who are you when there's nothing left to distract you? The people who've done it describe it as the closest thing they've found to peace, which is either something beautiful about the practice or something quietly haunting about everything outside it. But beneath all of it, the fasting, the prayers, the seclusion, the sacred night, there's something the entire month is actually fighting. And it's not hunger. It's not even distraction. It's older than both. The nafs. The real fast in Ramadan is not from food. It's from the thing that makes the food feel necessary in the first place. In Islamic theology and classical Sufi tradition, the nafs refers to the self, specifically the ego, the lower self, the part of the human being that craves, resents, competes, and performs. Classical Islamic psychology, drawing on Quranic references across Surah Yusuf, Al-Qiyamah, and Al-Fajr, and developed extensively by scholars including Al-Ghazali and Ibn Arabi, identifies multiple levels of the nafs, from the nafs al-amara, the commanding self that drives toward gratification, to the nafs al-mutma'inna, the tranquil self, finally at rest. Ramadan, in this framework, is a month-long campaign against the commanding self, against the part of the psyche that uses food, entertainment, social validation, and comfort as armor against genuine self-examination. Strip those things away, day after day, and the nafs has nowhere left to hide. The hunger is a tool, not the point. The body's discomfort is designed to surface something deeper, the restlessness that was always there, the anxiety that food was quietly numbing, the ego that needed constant feeding long before Ramadan arrived. The fast doesn't create these things. It removes the static long enough for you to finally hear them. Ramadan doesn't ask you to be better. It asks you to be honest, and sometimes that's harder. And then there's the person who did all of it, the fasting, the prayers, the intentions, the seclusion, the war against the nafs, and walked away with nothing. The one who fasts and gets nothing. There is a hadith recorded in Sunan ibn Majah that says, "Many a fasting person gets nothing from their fast except hunger and thirst." This is the most haunting sentence in Ramadan, not because it describes a sinner or someone who failed ritually, but because it describes someone who fasted, who woke before dawn, who endured the hunger, who showed up to the mosque, broke the fast at the right moment, said the right words, and somewhere in the gap between ritual and sincerity was absent the entire time. The month passed over them like weather. Present, then gone. Nothing changed. The terrifying detail is that this hadith does not describe a behavioral failure. It describes an interior one, which means you cannot audit for it from outside, and the person it describes may not even know it was them. This is the entry that reframes everything before it. Every tear, every intention, every night prayer, every hour of seclusion, all of it was architecture designed to prevent exactly this. To ensure that at the end of 30 days, the person standing on the other side is genuinely different from the one who began. The month doesn't grade on attendance. It never did. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.